Hello, and welcome to the Autism, ADHD, and Us Three podcast with me, Jenny Lucas. We'll be talking all things neurodiversity, including late diagnosis, parenting, and everything else that comes in between. This podcast is not intended to be diagnostic. I am not a doctor. These are our personal experiences, peppered with research and occasionally the experiences of others. The podcast is intended as a supportive guide through the experience of parenting neurodiverse children as a late diagnosed person, hopefully bringing some relatable stories and laughs along the way. Any relevant links will be in the show notes. Let's get into today's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you so much to all of you who are listening along and have sort of become semi-regulars. I really appreciate you being here and taking the time out to listen to my podcast. If anybody out there would like to also maybe add a comment or get involved if you're listening on Spotify and any interactive polls, then that would be incredible. It genuinely gives me joy when I log into the Spotify app to see what has been going on, who's been interacting. But thank you for coming along and listening today. And I wanted to share with you something that has genuinely changed my parenting for the better since I became aware of it. And that is using the question or asking the question, why, a lot in my parenting. As a parent, I didn't really know what I was doing, like most of us think when we first start. I thought I had a reasonable idea because I have got a sibling that's 10 years younger than me. So I was quite aware when he came along of like a little bit about what life was like with a baby, and I got quite involved in sort of being a big part of his life in terms of like helping care for him and just being a really involved big sister. So I kind of felt like I'd had some experience. I had also been a teacher for a little while as well before I fell pregnant. So I thought I was in a good place. Little I knew before having my first child. And then no one can really prepare you, can they? And I think that now, being a little bit older and having friends that are still just starting out on the journey as parents, I have a little thought inside my head every time someone sort of announces, oh, we're having a baby and first babies. And I just think to myself, you have no idea what's coming in the most wonderful ways, but it's very hard to describe what parenting is like until you actually experience it. Certainly that's been my experience, and as an ADHD person, I couldn't have imagined the intensity of parenting as a parent. Funnily enough, no, since I've had children and I think about the relationship that my parents have with my children and my husband's parents have with their children, I can see how much fun it must be to be a grandparent, because you get to be actively involved in their lives if you want to be, but there's like not that intense pressure on you to like not fuck them up. You know what I mean? Because you're not like the wholly responsible adult, so you get to do some really great stuff with them, and have a little bit more fun. And I can see how being a grandparent could be a more sort of fun and relaxed experience because you're not wholly responsible for them becoming fully fledged adults at some point in the future. But actual parenting just knocked me for six, and I had the strangest experience when my eldest child was born. And it was quite a quick birth, actually, quicker than everyone was expecting it to be when we first checked in. But when they handed her to me, and at this point, bearing in mind I had completely no idea that I was ADHD, that I had sensory issues, that I had ick, and basically she was born and they like handed her to me straight away. So she was all covered in the stuff that they're covered in when they're born, and she was like this little purple alien thing. And I had this really strange idea in my head that when she was born and I looked at her for the first time, I was going to recognize her, and I was going to have like that sensation of instant recognition, like, oh, there she is, the kid that I've been carrying for the last 9 months. I know you. And they handed this little purple, wriggly, covered in goo alien to me, and I was like, what the fuck is this? What do I do now? And I didn't have that moment of instantaneous recognition, and I didn't have that moment of, you know, what they say, you look at them and you have that, oh, that immediate burst of love. I didn't have that initially. And I just kind of was in shock about what had just happened to my body, what we had just gone through. It was quite traumatic at moments. There was a moment where we thought maybe we might have lost her in the birth, and that was quite scary. And then they handed me this baby and was like, there you go. And I didn't know what to think, to be honest, but I didn't feel the way that I expected to, and that really threw me. Um, it just wasn't how I expected. I don't know how anybody could have really prepared me for that, but in my little ADHD brain, I really, really struggled with that moment. That's actually given me an idea for something I might do in a future podcast. I must try and remember. But as time went on, obviously, my husband is a fantastic daddy and has been a hands-on 50-50 parent as much as he's been able to, because he works quite an intensive and busy full-time job. And over the time, as tends to happen, I sort of picked up default parent responsibilities. I was at home more, obviously, and that's kind of how our relationship grew as parents over the time. And I found myself being quite reactive and almost sort of falling into parenting patterns that I had put on me as a child. And it was a really sort of surreal experience because I was aware of the ways sometimes that I had been treated as a child where I didn't want to sort of do the same things with my own kids. But it was almost like this pre-conditioned pattern in my body. It was like I couldn't help myself. And I could hear it various times. I could hear my mum's voice coming out, and I could hear my dad's voice coming out, and I could hear my grand's voice coming out in the way that I was sort of behaving around my child or parenting my child. And I found that quite disconcerting in a way because it felt built in. It felt like this was just how it was going to be, despite the fact that I didn't want it to be this way and I wanted to do some things differently. It felt like ingrained, almost like it was the default position. And for some time, I was quite a reactive parent, um, particularly if I was overwhelmed. And what I now know was having meltdowns or in sensory overload or whatever, I would react, and I could be quite loud and quite shouty and quite unkind actually in my reactions. But I felt stuck in that. Just, I didn't have the tip. People would say, oh, start to become aware of your, or count to 10 or walk into another room and take a minute. And it was like, but I don't seem to have the capacity to even be aware of the fact that I need to do that, because it goes from 0 to 60 in 0.01 seconds, and suddenly before you know it, I've lost my shit again, and another opportunity to change has passed me by. And I really struggled with that, and I really struggled to know whose advice to take as well, because as an ADHD person, I find it quite difficult to know what the right course of action is without having done lots of research and had lots of other opinions on it in order to be able to form my own. I really struggle to form my own opinions on things straight away. I need information to be able to know what I stand for and what I believe in, which is to this day is still something that I struggle with. And so that made, what it's like when you become a new parent and there's advice comes at you from fucking everywhere. Every person that's ever had contact with a child has a piece of advice for you about how to parent your child, about what equipment you're going to need, about how they should sleep and what they should eat and when they should eat, and all of the ways that you should behave around them and all of the activities. There's an endless list of advice that people have, and that was really overwhelming, not knowing who to listen to, what I believed in, or what I should take on as my own. I don't know if you've ever found yourself in that position, but I just felt like I could do no right sometimes, because there's always someone that will chime in and go, oh, you should do it this way, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. And that it's constant. It's constant. And so as a parent, I really struggled with, the conflicting advice that would come from different places. Sometimes you'd speak to two different who are the people that come and visit you when you're at home? The community midwives. That's not the correct term for them, but the people that would come and visit you at home when you'd had your baby, and two different visitors, health visitors, that's the word, thank you, would give you conflicting advice about the same thing, and just sometimes didn't know where to turn. What I did know though was that I didn't want to be the same parent that I'd had growing up, if you know what I mean. Well, I had two parents, but I didn't want to be an amalgamation of those two parents. I wanted to be a progression of those two parents, if you like. And there were certain things that they did that were fantastic and I wanted to keep, and there was other certain things that I wanted to change about my parenting style. Um, and so I had that kind of deep burning desire. I did not want to continue to be this reactive, sometimes not very nice parent, because I knew that I would be ultimately creating some sort of emotional trauma in my children. And I didn't want to do that. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be perfect, but I strive to be better. So the first step for me was having some sort of open curiosity about my parenting and asking why a lot. A little bit like the annoying toddler phase that children go through. And if you've got if you've got neurospicy children, you never really grow out of it. And as an adult, I've never really grown out of it. It's part of our charm, I think, as neurodivergents, is we're very curious. And so I honed in on my own curiosity on myself and my parenting style to try and at least try and figure out where it was coming from. So, what I started to do, aside from feeling the enormous guilt that you do if you've lost your shit, and then suddenly, a few minutes later, you've got out all that built up anger and everyone's crying and upset and sad, and and then you suddenly go, oh shit, I've done it again. So rather than spending lots and lots of time sitting and feeling guilty, I obviously did still feel guilty, but I used that as an opportunity to be like, right, okay, what happened there? Why did that happen? And it was a really slow process, but it sort of allowed me to start opening up the door to finding out what was causing me the issues. And I think ultimately, over time, that helped me to, it added fuel to the fire, if you like, in terms of finding out about my neurodiversity. Um, But in the moment, I was able to say things like, okay, well, why did I lose my shit when we were getting ready to go out the house? Because nobody was getting their shoes on, or I'd asked everybody to do something several times and they hadn't done it. That's why I lost my shit initially. Okay. And then sort of as time went on, I would progress and I'd be like, well, I don't really want to react that way. So how can we deal with things differently? And then it became a more open conversation around, okay, well, what was it? The kids weren't doing what they were supposed to do. Things didn't go the way I expected them to. Why was that a problem? Why did that cause me to feel frustrated in that moment? What can we do differently about it? Could we start getting ready a bit earlier? Could I get more sort of structure in place so that the little people can be more involved in getting themselves ready? There was just like little things that started to change around how we would do certain things where if it went wrong, I'd kick off. So that was really, really important. And that cautious curiosity is really interesting in terms of once you start to ask the questions, you get more questions, which can be frustrating. But it actually leads you to have some like realizations about things and about yourself and about how you perceive things and about things that you find challenging and why you find those things challenging and the ways that you can work around those challenges. And it also leads you to find out what your partner finds challenging, um, or asking your partner if there's a different way that they could respond, if they could, because sometimes you might be triggered by the way your partner responds to something, and that can open up conversations around how you both deal with things, how you both react to things. And it's not an easy process and it's not overnight, and there's some difficult conversations to have at times with yourself and with the people round about you. But ultimately, what it has led to in our house is a calmer, more structured environment where people feel ultimately safer in the space. And it's funny, I had this conversation with my eldest, who's 11 now, within the last couple of weeks, I think. And she actually commented to me, she said, since you have found out about your neurodiversity, you've become like a different parent. And actually, it's pre since I found out about my neurodiversity. But she has commented and noticed that I've become a different type of parent. And I asked her to expand on that in her own words. What do you mean by that? How do you mean? And she went, because you're calmer now and you don't like lose it as often, you're not as shouty anymore, and that's really nice. And I was like, yeah, that's what I wanted to create, was that nice calm atmosphere. But it was so interesting and actually a little bit, well, quite sad to know that she had lived through the experience of me not being a very calm parent. And I'm not 100% calm. By no means will never ever be a perfect parent, but I tend to try more often than not to be curious and be as calm as possible and understand that those children are not triggering me on purpose. They're not doing things to deliberately wind me up or make me lose my shit or make life difficult. They are their own individual humans having their own individual experiences with things that they also find challenging. And what I try to do with them now is be more open and honest in a way that hopefully they don't feel responsible for me and my moods. And we did go through a phase of that, particularly with my oldest, who, felt responsible for the atmosphere or the mood or whatever was going on. We're still going through a little phase of that now for different reasons. But it was that teaching them that they are not responsible for our well-being, our happiness. Their behaviour does not dictate how happy we are in life, or how happy we are with them in life. That was really, really important because they're not. And I wanted to try not to be that emotionally unavailable parent or that emotionally immature parent to cause them to have that sort of neuroses or that sort of hypervigilance. Now, I think my eldest does have a sense of hypervigilance from her younger childhood years before I became aware or able to cope with the things that I needed to change about myself and become aware of. But I try and be really open with them now if I'm finding something difficult, because I am ADHD. I do find things overwhelming. There are certain times where I wake up and I have no energy and everything is irritating and triggering and annoying. And it's really important that I'm honest with them about that and that they know it's not a reflection of them. It's nothing to do with them. It's just that there are certain times where I am unable to cope with extra demands, on like certain days or certain times, or if I've had a busy day at work or whatever. I want them to know that that's got nothing to do with them. That's all, that's a me thing. It's not triggered by them. It's not because of them. It makes life challenging, don't get me wrong, but I very much want to take the responsibility off of them and give them some autonomy to also be okay about having difficult days, because they do. Especially my eldest at high school's had a number of difficult days since she started, because going to high school's hard. And it's very hard when you've gone from a nice, tiny, little one form entry primary school into a massive secondary school with, over 250 children in a year group. There's lots in there for her. So she has lots of hard days, and I want them to know that it's okay to have hard days. We don't strive to have hard days every day of the year, but when we do have them, we're okay, it's allowed, and we are going to find some things more challenging than others. We also want the kids to be reflective and curious as well about how they show up in the world and the things that they find challenging, and that is really important because it helps them establish who they are and what their strengths are, what their challenges are, and it also helps them to be able to set boundaries as well. And it's not easy. It's not easy to be learning to do these things and also trying to coach other people to do these things. And by other people, I mean a child that is approaching preteen and a preteen who is, also experience all the things that preteens experience and the brain changes that happen with going from being a young person into a young adult into an adult. It's quite a melting pot of things, but we want to try and equip them to be independent, capable adults who can emotionally support themselves and who have a strong sense of identity and confidence in a way that neither of us were necessarily given, because there was a sort of lack of understanding around how that worked when we were children. So that is super important for us as parents, and going through this parenting journey with those two girls. We want to try and do things a little bit differently. So I have put together a resource which I'm going to put a link for in the show notes to this episode, wherever you are listening to it from. It'll also be available on my beacons.ai website. So it's a free resource that I'm putting together, where I've put the 5 questions so far that have been the most important to changing my parenting style and actually helping me develop that more, I don't want to say therapeutic approach because I'm not a therapist, but that more sort of curious, open awareness of my reactions, and developing that open awareness with the children and that open conversation with them as well. So we talked about why a lot in this episode, and why really is the starting question. It's the key one. Why have I reacted this way? That is the first question that leads to all the questions. And you will come up with your own questions that are important to you in your particular circumstances. But the ones that I've come up with that have really changed things for me over the last few years is, why is this so important to me? So whatever it is that I'm coming up against as a barrier, I will ask myself sort of why this particular thing is important to me. Where is this frustration coming from is another good question. That really helps to identify sort of what is going on in a moment that has led to an outburst or the cusp of an outburst, and working backwards from there to try and figure out how we can prevent that in the future if it's possible. Whose voice am I hearing right now? So I was more aware of this question in the beginning than I knew what to do with. So I said earlier on that I could hear certain of my own influential voices in my head when I was talking to my children or reacting to my children. It was quite important to then understand how to unpick that. Why was it that voice that was coming through in that moment? What did that mean for me? I find particularly when I'm in moments of frustration, or I feel frustrated about something, the question, who am I trying to please right now, is a really important one. Because actually, if there's an expectation that is not being met somewhere and it's causing stress or frustration, who am I trying to please? Why am I doing this the way that I am? And what is the purpose of that? Is there a benefit for that? And the final one at this point in time is, can I find a way to do this differently or let this go? And all of these questions sort of, they come in moments of particular high stress or frustration. And they have been really, really useful for me to identify what I'm struggling with in my parenting, or in particular moments, if there was patterns and routines of challenges, why were they challenging and how could I change them? And those 5 questions have really, really helped me dig quite deeply into that, to be able to understand where it's coming from and what I need to do to make the changes to make our lives better, to make them more comfortable for me and for the kids, and let's be honest, for everybody else round about me, including my husband. So I've put those questions together in a free download. It's not just the questions, I have put some sort of other information to go along with it so that they make a little bit more sense. If that's something that you think you'd find useful, there will be a link in the show notes where you can download that. It's just a PDF, it's free, it's something that will hopefully help you. And if it does, please let me know. If you found it useful, you can ping me an email, or you can leave a comment or a review, anything you like. I'd really love to know that if it's been useful for you, because the whole purpose of having this podcast and having resources to put out there and having a TikTok where I'm talking about my life experiences is because I want people to feel less alone. I want people to feel understood. I want people to feel that there's hope and that there's, there's ways to change if we're finding things difficult. There's support out there if we're finding things difficult, and ultimately that we're all trying to do the best thing for our kids. And there's no right or wrong answer. There's no one way to do things. I'm only sharing the things that work in our particular household, And hopefully that will spark a light in other people's households and help to support, because I really want to grow a nice community out there where we can work through these challenges together and just feel like we're not failing human beings, that we do experience some of the same challenges and that we can find ways through it together. So, if anything that I'm sharing is having an impact or rings a bell or sort of sparks a sense of not feeling so alone with this sort of stuff, then please do let me know, because sometimes, I mean, I'm literally sitting here talking into my phone at this moment in time, so it would be nice to know that it's reaching you out there and it's making some sense. So that is us for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. Anything that I've shared will be in the show notes, and if you want to get in touch with me, all my contact details will be in there too. I hope you have a great next few weeks, and I will see you on the next episode. Thanks so much. Take care.